Okay, so I think halfway through this talk, so I've got 12 minutes, about 6 minutes in, Shabir's going to blow the whistle, and at that point I've been thrown out of your party, and I am free, at long last I am free. Look, I want to start off because if we were having this meeting a year ago, we were obviously in the run-up to the launch of your party, and it's worth just taking a step back to think about where we came from to get to today. So when that process started in July, there was 800,000 people signed up, excited about the prospect of a new left electoral project. And I think if you think, well, where did that come from? What were the sources of that hope? Then I think there was a number of elements that we can identify. First, and most importantly, was the Palestine movement. By that stage, for 2 years, we had been out in the street every weekend in our towns and our cities. By that stage, we were on, I think, about number 30 of our national demonstrations. We had shifted dramatically public opinion on the question of Palestine, opposition to the genocide, opposition to the State of Israel, and hostility not only to the establishment but to the establishment political parties who were up to support for Israel up to their necks in that process. And at the general election in 2024, there were a number of pro-Palestine independents who had stood. There was the 5 independent MPs who were returned, Jeremy, of course, but the others. But more than that, across the country, there were a series of pro-independent, pro-Gaza independent candidates who got 30%, votes in the 20s, votes in the high teens. If you took it together, it was the best ever left of Labour electoral return in this country. Right? It was far better than the Communist Party ever did at their height immediately after the Second World War, or the example of Respect, which did get George Galloway in and had a number of people who got votes in their 20s, but the scale of this was so much bigger. And it showed, therefore, that there was an electoral space to the left of Labour that we could occupy. So the first element, promoting that excitement and hope amongst those 800, was the Palestine movement and the evidence that was there. The second thing was that during the Palestine campaign and around various campaigns around cuts and austerity, around the country there were groups of independent councillors. Some of them had been Labour councillors who left over Palestine, some were thrown out over Palestine, some had refused to implement cuts or be part of those, but in places like Liverpool, Derbyshire, and parts of London, there were groups of independent councillors who again emphasised that it was possible to challenge Labour to the left electorally and who had a base in their communities. So the Palestine movement, there was evidence of the general election, there was the local elections that were there. Then there was the 2 other factors I think that are very important. One is Jeremy Corbyn himself. So Jeremy, in terms of his role as a leader of the Labour Party and the popularity, and the fact that he was seen to be somebody who was principled. I might have to use the past tense here. He was very, very principled. He always stood on for what was right. But nevertheless, he brought with him a huge number of people in terms of his personal standing in the movement. And a layer of people who were with him in momentum in the Labour Party who, again, were looking for Jeremy to be that leader. The next element was Zara. Zara had been elected in 2024 from the Labour Party, but very quickly she lost the whip. But unlike the others who lost the whip over the 2-child benefit, she didn't shut up. She continued to speak out. She spoke out against the winter fuel allowance cuts. She nailed Labour over Gaza and the support for the genocide. And she split with Labour from the left, and she was a young Muslim woman, very brave, very prepared to speak out, and brought a lot of young people in particular alongside her. So Jeremy and Zara, the local councillors, the Palestine movement. And I think the 5th element that was involved here was that we had been under 15 years of austerity and cuts, of privatisation of services, of crumbling services at local and national level, of growing inequality, of breakdown of the National Health Service, our education system in a disaster, our roads full of potholes. I promised I was never going to talk about potholes again, but given the life as a local councillor, that's all you ever talk about, so I thought I'd throw it in. But all these things seem to be just crumbling about us with a cost of living crisis where the rich get richer and we're abandoned. And so those 5 things, I think, came together, and they are expressed in 800,000 people signing up, because at long last we have hope. Here is an alternative that is going to challenge Labour and can be significant, can win council seats, can win parliamentary seats, and can shift things in this country in a direction that we all wanted to go and see it. So objectively, that explains the excitement. And that was just about a year ago, about 10 months ago, as it stood. But from the very beginning, the Your Party project has been dogged by internal fights, by factionalism, by slurs being hurled across the party, in which it's partly tragedy, it's partly comedy, and it's partly, oh, for fuck's sake, can anybody not organise things just a little bit better? The frustration that all of us felt at that. That happened from day one. That Jeremy and all his supporters and Zara and all her supporters were in a meeting in which they agreed that Zara was going to leave the Labour Party and they were going to set something up together. But Zara then announced that without clearing the press release effectively with Jeremy, and from that point onwards, the two hardly ever spoke. From that point onwards, they were isolating Zara and Jeremy and the others in Parliament, and people became increasingly embedded. We moved over the summer. There was then going to be the launch of the campaign. So the original 800,000 was just an email sign up for more information. There was the launch of membership, and that was cocked up. Zara announced the opening of the portal ahead of Jeremy. Then Jeremy's response to that was to say that we were threatening legal action. And we had eventually what we had was 2 memberships, 2 ways of paying, 2 separate accounts, 2 separate email lists, one controlled by Team Zara, one controlled by Team Jeremy. I'm sure you've all forgotten this because it's like a horrible nightmare, but this is where we were at the end of the summer. We then had to move on to a membership and conference, and the membership figures came in, and the membership figures came in round about 56,000. Now, 56,000 was bigger than the Independent Labour Party at its height. It was as big as the Communist Party was at its height, but 56,000 from 800,000 is quite a jump in the wrong direction. So we'd lost hundreds of thousands of people along the way. We then got to conference, and at conference the decisions were divided. Those in charge tried to, at that stage, ban members of the SWP. At the same time, they said that there was 2 people who were about to run and charge the stage and throw over the table. That was myself and John Race. And we were banned from conference at least in the morning. Obviously, we only have the energy to jump up onto stage in the morning. By the afternoon, we're too old for that, and that's so we could be allowed in. So chaos at the conference, and I think the conference votes probably reflected that amongst the membership, there was just a real frustration at the factionalism that's going on. So the significant votes, I think, were for collective leadership rather than sole leadership, because we don't want either Zara or Jeremy because they keep on fighting. We want collective leadership. For God's sake, we want the branches to be up and running, and we want you to release the emails to allow us to contact people who want to be involved in your party. That was the second decision. And the third one was, we're in favour of dual membership. If you're a member of a socialist organisation and you want to build your party, you should be allowed in. And those were the 3, I think, most significant votes at conference that were right votes. They were on the right side, and they should have then created the situation where we could move on after conference. Unfortunately, we didn't. We moved into CEC elections, and in the CEC elections, it was deeply factionalised. We had grassroots left and we had the many, and from that point on, everything became a wedge issue. Are you anti-Zionist, or are you not an explicitly anti-Zionist? Are you for trans rights, or are you against trans rights? Are you for this issue or that issue? Are you for this issue and for that issue? And everything became a wedge issue between the 2 factions. Now, we tried to run a campaign as Counterfire that came through the middle, that tried to argue that this was not the way to build the party, that we had to have some sort of unity, that we had to have a vision of a radical insurgent party that would be embedded in our movements. And we got about 10% of the votes for the CEC, indicating to me at least that there is a constituency for that approach. But in a faction fight, it's always really, really difficult if you're trying to come through the middle. And the reality was that the CEC became a body where 14 members of the many are on board and 9 members of the grassroots are on board. And since that was established, every CEC meeting, every single vote has been 14-9 as people have continued to vote for their factions. So there's no building bridges in any way. Final thing, therefore, is today. Because today, the many are putting forward a motion, and that motion is for the proscription of socialist organisations and the expulsion of socialists from your party. Effectively, that means that they have listed the Socialist Workers' Party, the Socialist Party, the Revolutionary Communist Party, the Communist Party Provisional Central Committee. I didn't even know who that was, to be honest with you. And then People's Front of Judea and the Judean People's Front. And then Counterfire is not mentioned, but in the following thing it says that any organisation with an external leadership, with an external membership, or which runs on democratic centralist principles would also be covered by that. So there's 2 things. First of all, peace and justice, I think, has 2 of those 3, but I presume will not be expelled. And Counterfire may not be expelled, but we want to make it clear that we will be leaving if they carry that motion, because we are not a scab organisation. If they expel socialists, we are not going to be part of that network that does so. So, now, Jonathan's going to talk primarily about the Greens and all this, but I want to say that one of the great things, of course, coming out of this is that we've gone from 800,000 to a rump organisation, effectively, and they're about to kick out the most active people of that organisation. So my own view is that your party is either over or it's going to absolutely struggle. But into that vacuum, lots of people have turned towards the Greens, and the Greens have now grown to 200,000. And the interesting thing would be how many of those were sign-ups to YP. But I want to pose just 2 things before I hand over to Jonathan. First of all, Zach Polanski has spoken very well. He speaks out about austerity and cuts, and he speaks about genocide and whatever. But the Green Party, at their conference a few weeks ago, continued to support NATO and refused to support the nationalisation of water, of electricity, of gas. So we shouldn't paint them into being some socialist organisation that they are not. And the second thing is that I sit in Lancashire County Council, the main opposition called Progressive Lancashire, which is 7 independents, pro-Gaza independents, and 4 Greens. And of those 4 Greens, one of them is a great guy who's like us. And the other 3, well, the other 3 are really nice people. And the first meeting I said to them, and what's your position on Palestine? Oh, we hate what's happening in Palestine. I said, oh, good. Do you go to the weekly Palestine demonstrations? No. Have you been to the national demonstrations? No. I haven't had time to do that. 2 years into a genocide. Now, the point about that is not to be smart-arsed or snotty about them, but what I'm trying to say is that they don't have a focus on mobilising on the streets. They don't think that mass campaigns are important. They're much more concerned with localism in terms of electoral politics and getting themselves onto committees at councils and therefore they're not that radical, insurgent, movement-based organisation. You might think Polanski's like that, but the vast majority of the Green membership, the old Green membership, are not that kind of organisation. They're a sort of lefty, liberal, righty, labourist, traditionalist political party. And I'll leave Jonathan to explain a bit more.